Finance, Administration and Finance Committee will come to order. Roll call, please.
Ms. Beebe? Mr. Bennett?
Here.
Ms. Bofi?
Here.
Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bastu?
Here.
Mr. Garvey? Mr. Guillo? Ms. Hill? Mrs. Lee? Mr. Orange-Jones? Mr. Orange-Jones is absent. Mr. Romer?
Here.
Mr. Romer is present. You have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum, and no other board members can join the committee after the roll call. Okay, first item.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval. We will be adding items 6.1 and 8.1. Mr. Chairman?
6.1 and 8.1.
We will be adding 6.1 and 8.1 to the consent agenda. They're starred.
Okay.
They are starred on your agenda.
We have a recommendation. Do we have a motion for approval?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion concerning the consent agenda? Any objection to the consent agenda?
Is that recommendation of
Would you speak into the mic, please?
It's been clarified, thank you. I have no question.
Okay, all right. Any other question concerning the consent agenda? Okay, if there's no objection, motion carries. Next item.
Okay. Your first standing item is item 4.1 on page 59. It is a consideration of federal and state grants and allocations to LEAs, Type 2 charters, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations. The department recommendation is to approve.
We have a recommendation to approve the grant allocations to the LEAs. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second? And a second by Ms. Bradford. You'll note on page 59 that it's 6 allocations for a total of $328,185.92. Any discussion on any of the contracts or any of the allocations? If there's no discussion, is there any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item. You ready for it? The chair has been notified that the attorneys are here for the executive session. That is item 9. It's item 9, 9.1.
Correct.
The chair would entertain a motion to take this item out of order. We have a motion and a second to take this item out of order. Is there any discussion of taking the item out of order? Any objection? Motion carries.
Okay.
Now, the chair would entertain a motion to go into executive session to consider 3 items. It's Berry et al. Versus White et al. Item 2 is Alberta W. Sims versus Louisiana State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. And item 3, prospective litigation from First Line Charter School. The board will not take any action in the executive session. You understand the topics that will be considered. I don't know exactly how long, but I'm going to estimate 30 minutes. The chair would entertain a motion. Well, I believe we have a motion. Is there any discussion before we take a roll call vote on going into executive session? If none, would call for the
Ms. Beebe seconded.
I thought that's what I thought. Okay. Ready
Ms.
for the
Beebe?
roll call?
Ms.
Here.
Beebe's at, oh, okay, yes.
I mean,
Mr. Bennett, it's a yes or no.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Mr. Bennett? Ms. Bofi?
Yes.
Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey's absent. Mr. Gill?
Yes.
Ms. Hill? Yes. Ms. Orange Jones? Ms. Orange Jones is absent. Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Lee, yes. Mr. Romer? Mr. Romer, yes. Ms. Dasty?
Yes.
Ms. Dasty, yes. You have a quorum. Motion passed.
Okay, we'll be in executive session for approximately 30 minutes. Chair would entertain a motion to come back into open session. I have a motion
So moved. Second.
and a second.
Whatever you need.
Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Now, the chair would call on Mr. Bennett to make a motion.
Yes, sir. Make a motion that we authorize our legal department to address this item number 2 that we spoke of, to reach a successful conclusion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. This is concerning one of the items that was discussed in the executive session. Is there any discussion of the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Motion carries. I believe Ms. Dastude has a motion.
Yes, sir. I'd like to, this is, also pertains to item 9.1. Number 3, I'd like to move that BESE consent to filing a petition for declaratory judgment for purposes of reforming an irreconcilable internal contradiction in the charter contract entered into between First Line Charter School and BESE.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
And we have a second by Ms. Hill. Any discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. I believe that we're now ready for the next item.
The next item is 4.2 on page 74, a consideration of contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The department recommendation is to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the contracts and leases, $988,933.46. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is 4.3 on page 79, a consideration of fiscal dialogues as a result of the fiscal risk assessment process. The department recommendation is to receive.
The chair will entertain a motion to receive the recommendation by the superintendent.
I so move.
We have a motion. Is there a second? I'll second. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 5.1 on page 81, a consideration of RSD contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The department recommendation is to approve.
We have a small amount this month, only $7,904,609.55. Chair would entertain a motion.
Move to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion?
Yes, sir, Mr. Lee. In looking at some of the contracts, and I don't know if it's on this, in this particular area, I noticed that some of the contracts were effective August and then, of course, through last year. So I'm just wondering why we are operating, it's kind of like, and maybe I'm not on the right answer, right item, but it's like the emergency granting.
I'm not sure why they're classified as emergency, but most of them, as I appreciated, are contracts with architects.
Some of them are adjustments
Okay.
to current contracts.
Most all of
And-
it is FEMA money.
But these are all FEMA construction contracts. Some of them
Right.
are adjustments to current contracts, and that's why if they're dated as having started before today.
Okay, and that was the concern, that, you know, it has one date after the fact, and just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Okay, any other discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 7.1 on page 112, a consideration of 8G funding cycle activities. The staff recommendation is to approve.
We have a motion to approve, a recommendation to approve the 8G funding cycle activities. We have a motion to approve and a second. Okay.
Mr.
Any
Lee,
would you like to make some comment?
I would just like to add something to that and provide the board with an update. Kim
Okay.
Trippo, BESE staff. Just wanted to update the board on another funding cycle issue regarding the anticipated 8G funding decline in revenues that will affect management and oversight in the next couple of years. Currently, our evaluation and assessment spending is charged to management and oversight. The Board of Regents doesn't have the same issue because of an amendment to the statute in 2001 that allows evaluation spending to be counted as a program cost as opposed to part of management and oversight. So this time, I just recommend and ask for your support of adding BESE to this amendment to allow costs incurred for the evaluation and assessment of support fund programs to be paid from the program in which the evaluation and assessment costs apply.
Okay. Would that change the recommendation and the motion that's before the board now?
It's merely, I guess it would be an addition, just
Yeah,
another
I'll
point of clarity.
I'll make a motion that we seek an author, a legislator to amend that statute to include BESE so that BESE and Board of Regents what they're doing is can basically charge the program evaluation cost to the cost of the program, because BESE has I think it's a 3-year average cap of how they can,
That is correct.
as far as cost. This is something that's been discussed in previous years, that this was coming and that we need to deal with it, and this is the year that we're being asked to deal with it. As I understand it, is it Senator LaFleur has offered? Is there someone? Senator LaFleur has offered to make this amendment on the board's behalf.
Okay.
That's a messy
Ms.
motion,
Astute,
I know.
As I would appreciate it, your motion is to amend the recommendation to include this adjustment.
That's exactly right, Mr. Chairman.
That's what I thought I understood you to say. And we have a second? Yes. Any further discussion?
Just for clarification, how is that different from what's taking place now?
I'm going to let Kimberly speak to it.
At this time, the cost of the evaluation and assessment is charged to management and oversight.
Okay. Any further discussion? Any objection? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 8.2 on page 114, a consideration of legislation for the 2012 legislative session.
I would offer a motion that we approve the policy statements as presented, with the exception that we have a modification to number 7. And the modification I'll read to you is that we support a strong BESE approval and add the words "and monitoring process for non-public schools receiving public funds as the ultimate measure of school quality as specified in the Louisiana Constitution."
I'll second that.
We have a motion on the floor to support the recommendation with adjustment to item 7.
That's correct. And the adjustment is after BESE approval, add the 2 words "and monitoring."
Okay, you have a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion?
I'd like to make a substitute motion.
Okay.
On number 7, that same item, I'd like to not put public funds, I'd like to put scholarship funds there instead.
Instead of public.
Instead of public funds. You agreeable, sir?
Yes.
Can I ask a question to the superintendent? Does that change, since you have to present, you have to defend the board's positions in the legislature, does that change the context of
I don't
the
believe
statement in
so,
your
as
opinion?
there is not legislation regarding directing of other public funds to non-public schools. I don't think that changes the circumstance.
Does that
Okay.
need a second? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, we have a second to Mr. Bennett's. Okay. Is there any further discussion about item 7? Now, I have a comment I want to make about item 5, but any further discussion about item 7? Item 5 states, we support the establishment of a funding system supportive of educational choice so that every child may be afforded an equal opportunity to develop his or her full potential. It's the word equal that I think needs to be given some consideration. As I appreciate it, this might have to be clarified, but as I appreciate it now, with charter schools, with local school systems, all revenue is considered in determining the per pupil amount. And that is used to determine the amount that indirectly goes to those that exercise choice, which makes inequity among schools, among students receiving educational opportunities, because right now the other revenue for charter schools or private schools is not considered in the amount in their per pupil amount they receive. Is that accurate, Ms. Ciano? Do you understand what question I'm raising?
Let me just clarify. You're saying that revenue that the charter schools would have on their own outside of anything?
Right. It's not being considered now.
Right. There is a small amount of money that...
Well, it might be small in some cases. It might not be small in other cases. But there's also no
Mr. Lee,
no consideration of funding from others that would receive the vouchers.
For example, in a charter school budget, whatever they get for contributions and donations would likely be the only money that we would be referring to, and therefore the districts are not, we don't include that as revenue for the districts as well.
Well, wait, say that again?
So, Ms. for when a school has its own fundraiser, a traditional public school or a bake sale or something like that, and they then spend that money on a field trip, do we count that in the per capita?
You're talking about individual schools now, and I'm looking at, you do consider all of the revenue that comes to the school system, being primarily sales tax and property tax. Aren't those the two items that make up primarily the local revenue?
There is not revenues in the, for example, in the charter school budgets that would align with other revenues that the school districts have. Those would be absent from their particular budgets.
Let me get clarity on what you just said. You're saying school systems receive other revenue that's not considered in the per pupil amount?
School systems have the ability to generate some other revenues, like 16th section lands is one that the charters would not have the ability to generate, so there wouldn't be an issue there.
But that 16th section revenue is considered in the local per pupil amount.
Yes.
That's my point.
But that we only do a portion of that. It's very, very small.
50%.
But it's very, very small.
Pardon me?
The amounts statewide are very, very small.
50%.
Okay.
It just bothers me when we use the word equal, and I'm not sure that that's a correct statement. if we're talking about
Does
equal,
equitable, is this equitable?
if we're talking about equal educational opportunity, it ought to be treating everybody's revenue.
Put excellent. How about that?
Pardon me?
How about take out equal and put excellent?
Mr. Chair, I do agree that.
No, I think you understand my point.
I think equitable is probably maybe more acceptable.
No, I'm not trying to make a change with this wording. I think you understand my point. And pardon me?
Take it out completely.
It could say every
Well,
child
but
may
it
be
leaves,
afforded the opportunity.
it leaves the question. It just leaves the question. Okay.
I'd like to
Is
make a
there any
comment.
other discussion
one
with
change.
any of the other items?
Right here. No, on this one, I just want to get some clarity in reference to equal. I guess Ms. Beth would be able to expound on this question. Could you give me an example of additional revenue as far as what Mr. Lee was talking to in reference to the public?
Wouldn't that be, I mean, are you talking about grants?
No, I'm talking about in reference to, Ms. Lee made an excellent point. If that percentage is being inputted in the per pupil amount, so if you have a charter school that have a fundraiser and they accumulate more funding, would that amount be inputted in the per pupil amount when we do the MFP budget?
No, but nor would it be for a traditional public school.
And I don't think it's good policy to set a disincentive for schools to raise their own money if they're capable. If it's an excellent school and people are willing to support it, then we ought to promote that, not come up with a zero-sum game.
It's not fundraisers, as I was raising a question about. It's grants, it's national money, it's what probably will be state money that's extra.
Mr. Chairman,
But anyway,
are you requesting
I'm
a
ready.
change, or are you willing to let it remain?
I'm not asking for a
Okay.
change. I think you understand my concern.
Well, I'm requesting a change then,
Uh,
because then it won't be equal.
that, are there any other questions or concerns that you want to consider before we vote? I think we've got a motion on the floor.
Yes.
Ms. Beebe.
Well, and I think number 5 is somewhat vague in that I think the emphasis, as I read it, is on educational choice. And I think as a BESE board, we need to emphatically state that we support adequate MFP funding to address the challenges of all entities. And because we've seen the decrease in the MFP allocation. So under 5, like I said, I read into the emphasis being on educational choice. But as a traditional public school employee, I think there should be more emphasis on, adequate MFP funding for all, for a traditional public school. And I'm just saying, as a member of the BESE board, the legislation is geared towards support for educational choice, but at the same time, we need to recognize our responsibilities to traditional public schools, and I don't hear much discussion surrounding those two.
Adequacy is always a question, always has been, and it will be.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's some technicalities and maybe some legal kind of questions or that may arise under the term adequacy. I know, so I would encourage the board or to not address that in these policy statements.
Okay, any other discussion concerning the motion on the floor? Are you ready to vote?
I'd like to read number 7, make sure we have that right.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Number 7 will read under this motion, we support a strong BESE approval and monitoring process for non-public schools receiving scholarship funds as the ultimate measures of school quality as specified in the Louisiana Constitution.
Thank you.
Is that what you would want in your motion? Okay. Any further discussion?
Is this the substitute motion?
Now, I accepted his amendment as a part of the motion, unless somebody's got some objection to that.
Yes, I'm going to object.
Right.
And I'm
Okay.
going to second it.
Pardon me?
Are you calling for the question?
I'm about to.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I was saying no to the motion.
Any further discussion before we vote? Okay. Any objection to the motion on the floor?
Yes,
Okay. Are you voting no?
I'm voting no.
Okay.
And Ms. Hill
Are
is going
you-
to second it.
Pardon me?
I'm voting no as well.
Okay, Ms. Hill's voting no. I'm voting to abstain. Any other objections? Okay, motion carries. Next item.
That is the end of your agenda.
Y'all are a tough